Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is the eagerly awaited sequel to my video Species and Populations 1, which I've called Species and Populations 2. So it's a continuation of topic 1.1. The entire topic 1, of course, being ecosystems and ecology. In the first video, we looked at the definitions that are relevant to this section to species and populations, including those two words themselves. And then this one, we need to look more at the interactions between living things. So basically, we're looking at biotic factors and the effect that biotic factors have on population growth and populations themselves. You can see the keywords again above my head as usual, but let's just take a quick look at the syllabus, or at least the remaining parts of the syllabus after we covered the first video. So we need to look at population growth, and that occurs in two kind of shapes. It's probably quite obvious already what those shapes are. One population growth curve is called an S-curve, and the other one is called a J-curve. They're related to specific types of species, which I'll talk about in a second, which grow under specific conditions. Limiting factors are biotic factors that affect population growth, certainly in terms of an S-shaped curve, and cause that population size to flatten off into a plateau. We've already mentioned this in terms of the definitions, but I'll just go into a little bit more detail about biotic factors. And I've chosen these particular examples, as you can see here, competition between species, competition for space to live, for food, and maybe even intra-specific competition for mates or the ability to reproduce. Then we look at possibly the most obvious interaction, which is feeding interactions of predation and herbivory, parasitism, mutualism or symbiosis, where species live together for mutual benefit, and then finally disease. And as I said, we're looking specifically at the interactions between different species and individuals of the same species, which we'll term biotic factors. Okay, moving swiftly on. This is an S-shaped curve. For obvious reasons, it looks like a letter S. An S-shaped curve is associated with long-lived species, mammals, top predators especially. So basically species that put their effort into a low rate of reproduction. They have few babies and they give a lot of care to those babies. The S-shaped curve itself has three phases, three parts. The first part is the exponential growth phase, where birth rate is very high and death rate is fairly low. So therefore we have an exponential increase. Part two, the transitional phase, where birth rate, which I've called here natality, same thing, is still going up but less than before. So therefore the curve is coming towards flattening out. And then finally part three is the plateau phase, where the birth rate equals the death rate, or in other terms, natality equals mortality. At this point, something is affecting the birth rate, and we refer to that as limiting factors. Those limiting factors are the biotic factors I mentioned before, as I've said here: predation, competition, disease, etc. We talked about this in topic 1, but in reality, the plateau phase is not really a plateau, not really flat. There's a fluctuation in population around what we call the carrying capacity. The carrying capacity being the maximum population size that can be supported in a habitat. And it's negative feedback that brings it back towards the carrying capacity all the time. Carrying capacity is referred to with the letter K. So, like I said, negative feedback. If the population rises too high, it can't be supported by the resources available, so it comes back down. And if it goes too low, it's brought back up by other forms of negative feedback. Okay. This is the J curve. Possibly a bit too steep, I've drawn it there. But again, it's called a J curve for obvious reasons. It looks like a letter J. It's associated with very short-lived species, insects especially, that have the strategy of putting all their effort into the population exploding, using up all the resources available to it quickly, and then shrinking down again or dying off. It's called a boom or bust strategy. So we could possibly complete the J curve by showing a drop off back towards zero again. The J curve is basically just the exponential phase of growth, and a plateau phase or a carrying capacity is never actually reached in a J curve species. Okay, so we talked about limiting factors in terms of the S-shaped curve. Those limiting factors are all biotic factors or interactions between living things. We're going to concentrate on 5 of them: competition for resources, feeding relationships, parasitism, mutualism, and disease. Okay, so number 1, competition or competition for resources. It can be between different species, or it can be between individuals of the same species. We'd call that respectively interspecific or intraspecific competition, specific relating to the word species. Interspecific competition between different species was studied by G.F. Gauss, famous ecologist, and he came up with Gauss's principle, and this relates back to the idea of niche. Gauss's principle is the idea that when 2 species come into direct competition, only one can ever win and take over that part of the niche, which is why we talked about niches being both fundamental niche and realized niche. The realized niche is the smaller niche that's realized because of the competition from other species. Gauss did his studies on a species of a few species of Paramecium, which is a protozoan or protist, a unicellular species here that just swims around. And he basically drew or studied and drew population curves for 2 species when they grew separately and then when he put them together. He studied here Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum. Now these 2 curves in each box, on the top box this represents the growth curves for Paramecium aurelia, first of all grown on its own and then grown in a mixed population with the other species, Paramecium caudatum. There's obviously an effect of competition when you put these 2 species together, but Paramecium aurelia basically holds its own. It reaches a carrying capacity, but a lower carrying capacity than before. When he did the same with Paramecium caudatum, this top curve is the S-shaped curve, growth curve individually, and this is the curve when he put it together with Paramecium aurelia. And you can see that Paramecium aurelia wins out, and Paramecium caudatum, when grown together with the other species, basically is outcompeted and it can't survive together in that niche. It can only survive separately. So that's just a good example of interspecific competition. Number 2, predation and herbivory. I can't say much about that. It's hunting of one animal by another in terms of predation, or grazing of plants by herbivores. Again, it's an example of negative feedback that controls population size, feeding relationships. Number 3, parasitism. We'll look at this in a bit more detail in the classroom. Parasitism is where one species lives on or in another species. They can be plants, animals, fungi, and we refer to them either as ectoparasites, as you can see here on the surface, or endoparasites within the host. The thing about parasitism is that a parasite is never favourable for the host. It's a very one-sided relationship, you could put it that way. Here's some examples. This is a louse, human head louse, I think, an ectoparasite. This is a tapeworm, human tapeworm again, endoparasite. And I'll tell you a bit more about this parasite in the class because I think it's so interesting. This is a cordyceps fungus that basically grows inside insects and basically grows inside the brain and can affect the behavior of the insect host. What it tends to do is make the insect crawl up to higher branches where the fungus then erupts off sometimes from the head or other parts of the body, and its spores can then be spread. It's also known as zombie fungus. It turns its host into basically a zombie. I'll show you some interesting videos about that in the class. That's parasitism. Number 4, mutualism, slightly more beneficial. Mutualism, unlike parasitism, is where both the host or both species that live together get a benefit from that living relationship. So here's an example of a bird cleaning a crocodile's teeth. The bird gets the benefit of the food, and the crocodile gets the benefit of clean teeth and gums. This is the relationship between a flower and a pollinating insect. The insect gets the benefit of the nectar, and the plant gets the benefit of the spreading of its pollen. And here's an example of a clownfish living in an anemone. Both get a protective relationship from the potential predators by living together. I'm sure you're familiar with that from Finding Nemo. Okay, and then finally, disease. A kind of strange biotic interaction, I would say. So disease is illness or infection caused by pathogens, and basically it's another limiting factor that causes the population to level off or not be able to exceed its carrying capacity. It's an example of a limiting factor and a biotic factor. Okay, I know I went through that very, very quickly. We'll go through it in a bit more detail in the classroom. But that's most of the material I think we need to know about to be able to look at some questions about topic 1.1. Okay, I hope that was helpful, and we will speak in the classroom. Thanks very much, everybody.